Hi, I'm James, and in this next of the Twilight 2000 retrospective reviews, I thought we'd have a look at this, the Small Arms Guide, which was written by Frank Frey and Lauren K. Wiseman. This was really useful for first edition Twilight 2000. It gave a really wide range of firearms for the game. There were some issues with it. There were predictions that didn't happen. So let's actually have a look at what it included. Now, there was a wide range. You've got a total of 56 pages, which is, and there's basically, if you look at them, 4 weapons per page, and then at the end you've got ammunition types and consolidated statistics and so on. Now, some of the best features were some of the thought that went into this. Now, I liked the fact that the M16EZ, I think that was a brilliant concept. The M16EZ was basically recycling parts that had been withdrawn as they were getting battered, but was still functional. And the idea was to give people in the States, in the sort of the militias that were working with the government, or governments in first edition, something that looked official. And it was a nice concept. You basically got the parts and then you went from there. I actually used it in Europe as well, as weapons were wearing out. So that was quite a nice little touch, and I have put the statistics for that for 4th edition in Cold War Goes Hot magazine I infrequently publish. There's also a section on black powder firearms. That was quite a nice little addition to the game. And then let's have a look at some of the sort of the different bits. Now, it wasn't always perfect. I mean, I looked at the statistics for 45 caliber pistols, and you had, for example, the M1911A1, the AMT hardballer, which is familiar to a lot of people because it's what Arnold Schwarzenegger carries in the Terminator, and the Colt Lightweight Commando, which was a cut down version. Now, bizarrely with them, the prices just didn't quite work for me. The 1911, if we use as the baseline, was $650. You then have the AMT hardballer, which is actually a lighter weapon, so it's got a benefit in the game. You're not carrying as much, but no difference other than that, and that was cheaper at $550. And the same with the Colt Lightweight Commander. Again, it was cheaper. So you perhaps had to modify some of the prices a little. What I did like, a feature as well, is some of the weapons, like the HK4. You actually had 4 different sets of statistics within the same stat block for the different caliber versions of it. So that was nicely done. Now, there are some interesting weapons. My old favourite, the G11. The G11 was Cubit the Cat trying to get his entry in the Hall of Fame. I believe David Willey with Finn the dog for that. I think Cubit, once he started watching them, decided he wants to be a YouTube star. So G11 obviously failed with German reunification. That was in the future when this was written. So it made sense at the time. I still think it's an iconic Twilight 2000 weapon, and I've included the stats for that in Cold War Goes Hot. Now, the MP5, one issue I have there is the HK54. For some reason with that, the statistics aren't there. They should be, but they're not. It just gives you the MP5, even though it talks about the HK54. So you would just need to modify that slightly. So moving on, we've got sort of various random weapons. Some of them are very Hollywood. The Ingram's Mac 10 or the M10, depending on what version you're looking at. They've got down as common in the West and scarce in the East. I think that only applies if you're in Hollywood. It really wasn't a common weapon. I know a few were bought by the American Special Forces, and I know the SAS used them, but really that should be a lot rarer. Which should bring up the problem with the game. If you could theoretically roll for each weapon until you actually got one you wanted, so you could keep rolling against all the 5.56 assault rifles to see if you could find anything, and that was never really addressed in the game. I like the way 4th edition has made it more a category based. You roll for assault rifles and then you actually see which ones there are. A weapon that a lot of people were surprised to see was the Sten Mark II, but it is worth noting the Sten and the M1 Garand were still being used by Danish reserves and the Danish Home Guard into the late 80s, I believe, maybe even further, so they were probably still in armories. Now, the Australian Leader rifle is a classic example where a weapon was detailed and there was logic to it. It was all figured out. It was expected at that point that it was going to be probably the Australian service rifle. It actually lost out to the Steyr AUG. But I quite like it, so I've actually sort of re-included it by making it a limited weapon where, because they couldn't get enough spares, couldn't actually get enough rifles, they actually started making that as an alternative weapon. What else do we have? Looking through, you've got various was another classic one there for a failed, well, not a failed design, but one that didn't achieve what it said, was the AR-18. It's been issued to the Chinese military as the Type 96. Well, I like that. That's actually a nice touch, and I think I actually would probably keep that, but obviously that never happened. Some of the illustrations are a little bit out. The British weapons in particular, the IW, usually called the SA-80 or the L-85, it is fine, but they've actually done the illustration of the prototype version of the L-86, the LSW. So while it's close, it's overlong. Now the M16, the illustration is actually of the A3 or the A4 variant, because it's the carrying handle removed and a sight fitted. So it doesn't actually mention that. You only have the M16 and the M16 EZ. Because of the way the rules worked with using a third of the ammunition, it doesn't differentiate between the original M16, the A1 and the A2, which was actually corrected for 2nd edition. Now again, British weapons weren't done brilliantly. The FN LAR isn't. It's actually the L1A1, which is the semi-automatic version of the FN FAL, and the picture is actually fairly close to it. It's not far off. The LAR is actually the heavy barreled version, which isn't actually detailed anywhere in the game. Occasionally the statistics were weird. The M21 sniper rifle, for example, had a faster rate of fire than the M14 it was based on, and the range was the same, so it didn't really make a lot of sense. But easy, quick correction. I sometimes felt that these were developed by different people and they weren't then sort of cross-matched. Going on to the shotguns, you've got the classic film favourite of the Spaz 12. Now if you watch that on film, a lot of the time it's used as a pump action, but it is capable of semi-automatic fire. So why use a pump action when you can have semi-automatic? Well, certain rounds don't have enough pressure behind them when they fire to cycle the action on semi-automatic. So the pump action is used for that. So that's something that is there, and it actually mentions it on the Browning Auto 5. Mentions that as a quirk, but doesn't actually then give any sort of rules for that. The other classic weapon that never made it in, HK seemed to be very unlucky with that. It was the HK core, or cores depending on which source you use. One thing I would add with that, people aren't aware, is it doesn't use standard 12 gauge rounds. If you try and use 12 gauge, or bore if you're in the UK, with the plastic cases, they actually melt. So it actually had a brass cased belted system. So you would need to be aware of that when you're actually playing the game. The LSW, the next one, the illustration is different to the one for the IW, and unfortunately this one's actually even further out. They've used the XL64, which was the weapon that was really the precursor to the SA80. So it does sort of pick up on that. It mentions it uses the same magazines as the IW, which is great, but I think there's a bit of an oversight there in that it misses the fact that these were actually the same as the M16. They were what will become referred to post this being written as the Stanag system. Worth noting, however, that they had very poor reliability. Only the initial batch had the American style magazines, and RG then very quickly produced a new magazine, and you can tell them apart because there's a gold colour for the Colt magazines, but the British magazines are matte black, so just something to look for. You then have the again it seems to be the British weapons, the Bren Mark II, which the illustration is correct, but the statistics then give the L4A4 version converted to 7.62. I would argue the stats would be the same, other than the fact that for some obscure reason it's got a magazine of 33, which is effectively a 100-round belt. There was an attempt to make the Bren into a belt feed, the Taden gun, which was never adopted. Instead, the FN Mag was adopted as the L7 GPMG. So just needs a little bit of an adjustment there. And the last bit I'll pick up on is the M134 and the M219, which are the miniguns, much beloved by Hollywood again. They are nicely done, the statistics are reasonable for them, but it makes no mention of the battery pack, which you would need to be able to fire, and the battery pack is a substantial weight. So, I mean, this was written, in all fairness, in, just looking for a copyright date, 1988. We're talking pre-internet, and as such, it's easy for those mistakes to have slipped through. We don't appreciate just how difficult it was then to identify stuff like this. We didn't have the internet. I mean, I remember in university a couple of years later, we were actually using, almost like the precursor, we were actually having to phone up Switzerland from the UK to actually get online, to access online databases and things. I was lucky, about the time this came out, a couple of years before, I'd actually got a copy of Jane's Infantry Weapons, and I could then sort of cross-reference. They weren't huge issues, they were easily fixed, and it was a really nice product. I had a lot of time for it. I still think it was a really nicely put together attempt, and it was nice to actually go back and look at it again, spot some of the little things in there that I went, oh yeah, I'd forgotten that was in there, that the leader rifle. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please click on the like button below so that I know what people like and I know what to make more of. Alternatively, if you've enjoyed it and think you'd like to see more, please click on the subscribe button. That way you get notified by YouTube whenever I bring out a new video. and you never know, there might be something in there that you hadn't considered, because I do cover a variety of things on the channel. And finally, if you have a little bit of cash going, I now have a Patreon account. I'm always looking for patrons, because at the end of the day, let's be perfectly honest, it's a good way for me to get a little bit of money that will use to buy review items or to travel to museums and so on. I don't put a huge amount on that. At the minute, all we've got is one tier charging £1 a month, which just, as I said, helps cover my costs. See you soon.